Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you are here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll continue our reading of Brainwashed by Tom Burrell. This week's chapter is Disunity. Why can't we stick together? And it starts with a quote from an OJ song called Backstabbers, which says, all the time, they want to take your place. The backstabbers. Backstabbers. The racially ugly tone of the 2007-2008 presidential campaign should have come as no surprise once Barack Obama officially declared his intention to become president of the United States. All 43 men who held who held the office before him were white, with a viable African American candidate in the race. Of course, racial paranoia would escalate to be exploited. What did come as a surprise were the divisive verbal bombs launched by high profile blacks, some of whom many thought should know better. Former United Nations ambassador and civil rights icon Andrew Young comes to mind. During an Atlanta Urban Medium Forum in late 2007, Young decided to wade into the area of hereditary and sexual prowess when comparing Barack Obama to former President Bill Clinton, the husband of Hillary Clinton, who was another candidate in the race. He said, Bill is every bit as black as Barack, Young quipped, adding, he's probably gone with more black women than Barack. Young quickly told the audience he was just clowning. But even when listening to Barack Obama's possible strong points, if he had to deal with America's biggest threats, which were China and Islam at the time, Young adopted a condescending and demeaning tone. He had a Chinese half sister. His mother married an African first, then she went to Indonesia and married a Chinese. So he grew up in a Chinese family. He went to Islamic schools in Indonesia. At least Young didn't use the black drug dealer stereotype. That was Bob Johnson, the founder of BET. In a state of exaggerated hubris in 2008, Johnson went after Obama and his staffers for criticizing remarks made by his chosen candidate, Hillary Clinton, saying, I am frankly insulted that the Obama campaign would imply that we are so stupid that we would think Hillary and Bill Clinton, who have been deeply and emotionally involved in Black issues since Barack was doing something in the neighborhood, and I won't say what he was doing, but he said it in the book, when they have been involved. Johnson didn't have to spell out that something. In Dreams from My Father, Obama wrote about his youthful alcohol and illegal drug use. As if the not so veiled swipe wasn't enough, Johnson, during that same speech, managed to twist the knife even further. He compared Obama to the character played by Sidney Poitier in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a film about a white elderly couple whose world was rocked when their daughter brought home her black beau for dinner. This ain't a movie, Sidney. This is real life, Johnson snapped. Johnson later issued a statement claiming that his comment at the South Carolina Clinton rally was in reference to Obama's early life as a community organizer in Chicago. I'm not sure which is more insulting, the comment or the explanation. As a candidate, Obama was fair game for criticism, but Young and Johnson could have campaigned on behalf of Clinton without going personal, without dragging Obama through the mud, without the use of not authentically black, drug abusing, socially coded threats that had been used for centuries to negatively define and divide blacks. In short, the brothers were crabbing and backstabbing. In defense of Hillary Clinton, the loyalists initiated personal attacks to keep Obama from winning the nomination. Crabbing and backstabbing are as much a part of our everyday conversation as they are fixtures in our comedy routines. This is far more than just a verbal put down. It's the full impact of the reflex that many blacks expect the worst from one another, harbor intense jealousy, and go to great lengths to sabotage their own. Greetings, real black gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. We're on page 209 of Brainwashed. We're talking about disunity in the community, and he's rehashing some of the black political class that was trying to tear down Barack Obama during his campaign. Just ask yourself, how many times have you encountered a black supervisor who was harder on black employees than his white charges, or was more disrespectful to blacks than any white boss? How often have you been sabotaged on the job by a black coworker? Has a black friend or relative ever announced that they had to find a white lawyer, doctor, or plumber because they just couldn't trust those black professionals? Crabbing and backstabbing are but a symptom of a much more sinister infirmity, disunity, or as we refer to it often in this discussion, disunity. In the civil rights and political arenas, crabbing and backstabbing are as old as the categories themselves. Some of our history's most impressive, far reaching agendas have been nullified due to black backbiting and orchestrated disruption. Killing each other is not limited to young brothers on the streets. There are black on black drive-bys in the political, entertainment, civic, and business arenas. This chapter examines how we have subconsciously accepted mistrust and powerlessness. Disunity is the handicap that hampers our ability to merge around almost anything, from job related tasks to progressive, all encompassing agendas. It is the biggest reason that Blacks, as a whole, stay frozen on the lowest rung of society's ladder. Disunity is the modern manifestation of Black inferiority propaganda designed to keep us imprisoned and in unconscious states of inferiority and hopelessness. Excuse me. Disunited and it feels so bad starts with a quote from the Disputed Truth blog, which says, "There is a saying in the Black community that Blacks cannot improve because, as a people, like crabs in a barrel, whenever one tries to climb out of the barrel, the other ones will pull him back down." A crabbing and backstabbing moment in my early career involved a major account in which our ad agency had been significantly undercompensated for the work performed. After much finagling, We gained an audience with both the company's senior vice president, who was white, and a vice president who was black. The senior vice president listened to our concerns and concurred that we deserved more money. He threw out a higher number. We immediately agreed to the suggested amount. Upon seeing where things were headed, the black executive chimed in, blurting, "No, no, no, they don't need that much." He then recommended a significantly lower amount. Unfortunately, his boss felt he had no choice but to agree. The original higher number that our client suggested was obviously fair. It's not in any client's best interest to overpay a vendor, but why did the black executive counter his white superior's number? Why did he believe that we didn't need, or was it deserve, that much? Did he think his stature would increase within the company if he demonstrated how he would keep a black owned agency in its place? Or did he feel that we, as a black owned agency, simply deserved less than a white owned firm doing comparable work? I have replayed that episode over the years and pondered the black executive's motivations. Today, I understand that he was but another victim of the powerful black inferiority campaign. But was he an exception, or is he the norm? Of all the brainwashing techniques, disunity may be the most pervasive. It directly led to the all too prevalent notion that the white man's ice is colder. It has historically branded black products, services, business, and people as inferior, substandard, or not good enough. We are so disunited from our authentic selves that we find comfort in artificial boundaries. The East Coast West Coast rap wars serve as a perfect example of disunity gone too far. What started as a new creative expression of black artistry quickly spiraled downward into gun toting rivalries between young rappers unable to separate myth from music. At one time, rap was defined by the sugary, benign stuff, like Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang and Summertime by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and tracks by other rappers like Criss Cross and MC Hammer. Politically conscious rap, following the 70s tradition of the Last Poets and Gil Scott Heron, paved the way for Public Enemy. But somewhere along the line, producers of hip hop came to realize that the real money, the real avenues to fame and fortune came via black music about sex, drugs, and violence, how they made it on the carcasses of those who trespassed on their turf, either in the streets or in the industry. Along the line, powerful forces realized there was gold in black music divisions. As a relay race, as if in a relay race, whites carried the 17th century baton of black inferiority for centuries, and amazingly, in the 20th and 21st centuries, they have been able to pass it off to blacks so they could finish the race, literally. Greetings, Sister Ra, and the elders listening with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're on page 211 of Brainwashed. The chapter is Disunity. Why can't we stick together? And he's highlighting the fact that many Black people in positions of power will put down Black people in front of white people, or will treat Black people worse than white people treat us just to prove a point because they want to be the only Negro. They want to be the special Negro in the room. There's a quote here from Chris Rock's 1997 comedy routine. Everything white people don't like about black people really don't like about black people. Chris Rock's routine was funny because we all know obnoxious and self destructive people. What's not so hilarious is the unrecognized conditioning that feeds such humor. Rock's comment, everything black people don't like about black people really don't like about black people, underscores the fact that we have been duped. Today, we are proudly repeating the negative sentiments and stereotypes that many whites hold about us. It's become fashionable for us to disrespect each other and assume that certain blacks will function like modern day minstrels. We pretend we have the luxury of categorizing ourselves as niggas and blacks, when it's always been a fuzzy distinction many whites use to rationalize discrimination. Numerous businesses and personal encounters have revealed the deep layers of division in our race. Perhaps, if you consider the following modern dynamics of disunity, you too will recognize a familiar pattern. Disunity dynamics, crabbing, complaining about blacks who have moved ahead of you. If I crab enough, maybe others will share my discontent and keep that person in their proper place. Backstabbing, sabotaging successful blacks due to envy, jealousy, or hatred. The author here does not specify that envy, jealousy, or hatred is of yourself or of the other black person. Lack of coalescence, refusal to support and unify with other blacks. Fear that if another black person rises to your level, your job or upward mobility will be threatened. Inability to form strong coalitions. Rather than uniting to gain power and influence, black groups function at a low level and can't seem to get traction. Lack of support and or mistrust of black goods and services. The white man's ice is colder. A genuine belief that any goods or services created or distributed by blacks are inherently inferior. Therefore, we sometimes go out of our way not to support them. Exceptionalism, the belief that you are the exception to the inferior black rule. You are special because you are the only black at the corporate management level or invited to the country club. Whites say that you are different than other blacks. You're special and you like it that way. Disunity for sale. It has now become the vogue to expose our intra-racial divisions through TV dramas, social commentary, and comedy shows. Black conservative pundits like John McWhorter and Shelby Steele have made comfortable livings as media experts on Black dysfunction. By contrast, the era of Obama is the showcase for the exceptional Black. This character has been a Hollywood fixture since the 1920s in films featuring a protective Black female housekeeper shooing a biscuit stealing Black driver or house servant out of Massa's kitchen. Today, The tradition continues with the feuds between Tracy Jordan, comedian Tracy Morgan, and James Toofer Spurlock, or actor Keith Powell, on the NBC comedy show 30 Rock. Toofer is the Harvard educated defender of everything black who takes Tracy to task for his buffoonish ways and his tendency to play to the stereotype. Tracy is the foul mouthed, N word hurling, late for work, ghettoized party guy who gives Toofer a hard time for being too nerdy and straight laced. The white leading actors, Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin, are just as goofy, but they serve as referees who patiently help the black characters navigate their differences. Fans of the show will no doubt fall back on the "it's only a comedy" defense. As funny as they may be, TV shows like 30 Rock do not educate, they humiliate. It all began with a boat. It's little wonder that many of us instinctively doubt and mistrust those of our own hue. For generations, we have been deluged through print and digital media and literacy, literary, scholarly, artistic, and marketing imagery of disunited, disconnected, and uncivilized Africans and African Americans. Our history offers a legitimate reason why other minorities have come to this country and surpassed African Americans in the areas of business development and the educational and cultural advancement. There's a valid explanation why whites, who may disagree on everything, still can coalesce and execute agendas that benefit their families, friends, and personal fortunes. There may be legitimate justification, but there will be no significant and sustainable progress until we explore why we are more comfortable supporting whites than blacks, why we cling to the individualism over collectivism, why our wounded egos prohibit us from coalescing and pooling our skills, and why we maintain rigid lower class versus upper class, light skin versus dark skin, highly educated versus uneducated divisions. We can crack the code that explains our inability to unify and our compulsion to disrespect and undermine one another. But to do so, we have to go back, way back, to another time and another continent when a strange boat arrived on West African shores. From Many Tribes One starts with a quote from a young man named Junior who is 35. He's a restaurant worker. And he says, "In my experience, Black people hate on each other more than any other race will hate on us. We are the most critical of each other. We insult each other's looks. We're more racist towards Blacks than they are. In many ways, Blacks brought to America were predisposed to division. The largest number of African slaves from the 16th through the 18th centuries came from the interior of West Africa. Dutch and Portuguese traders encountered a plethora of divergent cultures, warring factions, and sophisticated, archaic, or migrating societies. We were different in Africa, and we're different here. The soon to be slaves spoke different languages, worshiped different gods, and participated in innovative or complex forms of government. Captives were many unable to communicate with the new slave next to them. Together, these diverse and culturally divided people set out on a journey of thousands of miles, each as an individual island. The extra special slave. After arriving in the New World, the next cruelty was to auction slaves to the highest bidder with no regard for family or tribal connections. Slave owners practiced numerous techniques to kindle distrust and keep blacks afraid to unify. To maintain control, sometimes whole slave communities were punished for one troublemaking slave's transgression, whether it was real or imagined. This form of brainwashing divided the slaves' loyalties and convinced some that it was in their best interest to distance themselves from rebels or attempt to thwart their efforts. This goes back to that thing about Neely Fuller, who talks about Black people not being around each other. There's a quote here from a former slave named Anna Baker. Massa would tell me, Louisiana, if you keep your ears open and tell me what the darkies talking about, there'll be some good for you. He meant for me to listen when they talk about running off and such. I'd say round the old folks and make like I was playing. All the time I'd be listening. Then I'd go tell Massa what I heard. I'd say, bring me some goobers or a doll or some stick candy or anything. And you can bet your bottom dollar he'd always bring me something. It was not bad luck or bad timing that sabotaged Denmark Vesey's famous attempted insurrection in 1822. It was a betrayal by fellow slaves. Similar betrayals are also believed to have stopped many of the estimated 250 Southern slave uprisings documented by historians. Informing on rebellious slaves was one of the few ways blacks could seek reward from slave owners. The snitches, Naim Akbar explains, having demonstrated their loyalty, became the slave owner's grafted leader, a slave body with a master's head. Slave on slave violence. Slave owners employed overseers and drivers to manage their farms and plantations and to drive the slaves, like cattle, to work. Most often, these supervisors were poorer class white men, but as noted by Charles Joyner, author of Down by the Riverside, a South Carolina slave community, blacks occasionally served as overseers and drivers. And note, special note here, that in absentee ownership, they often had black slave overseers that ran the whole plantation and the landowner was somewhere else. For about 3 years, Thomas Jefferson, who owned 118 slaves in his Monticello plantation, relied on Great George, his trusted black overseer. When George died in 1797, Jefferson hired a white overseer with a reputation for keeping the slaves in line by withholding supplies or whipping them, even if they were sick. The ability to extract the maximum amount of labor and obedience from slaves was a prerequisite for overseers and drivers, whether they were black or white. In crafting the overseer's image, author William E. Whitehoff detailed how slave owners relied on enslaved blacks to apply the dispassionate instrument of plantation discipline. The author recounts the narrative of a former slave named William Curtis, whose master used color overseers to administer whippings with ferocity unmatched by white overseers. In the first part of the book, Clotel, or The President's Daughter, a narrative of slave life in the United States, published in 1853, author and former slave William Wells Brown, who was a mulatto, described his reaction at the age of 10 when he heard his own mother being whipped by a Negro driver. And from the book, he says, "Oh, pray, oh, pray, oh, pray." These are the words which slaves generally utter when imploring mercy at the hands of their oppressors. The son heard it, though he was some way off. He heard the crack of the whip and the groans of his poor mother. The cold chill ran over him, and he wept aloud. But he was a slave like his mother and could render no assistance. Imagine the rage and contempt that boiled in the mind of slaves who'd been pushed beyond exhaustion or whose backs had been ripped to shreds by a cattle nine tails wielding black overseer. Did the driver feel special or above the slaves he brutalized? Did he loathe himself or justify his actions in the name of survival? Such states of existence must have driven some slaves insane. This probably explains why 27-year-old Clyde Manning, a black slave who had no idea emancipation had occurred some 56 years earlier, helped his master kill 11 of his friends and fellow slaves. The color of descent. Often, Black people in such settings collude in their own shaming and humiliation because they have been socialized by internalized racism to feel chosen or better than other Black people. A quote from Bell Hooks. Another damaging aspect of enslavement was the field slave versus the house slave class system, with rewards and punishments that helped solidify color coded division. In her legal dissertation, Shades of Brown, The Law of Skin Color, Trina Jones of Duke University roots examined the historical roots and contemporary significance of prejudicial treatment practiced by individuals of the same race. Distinctions based upon mixed racial heritage became routine early on. Some whites fervently embraced the theory that light-skinned blacks were intellectually superior because of the white blood in their veins, Jones wrote. Many mulatto slaves attracted higher prices on the slave market and received coveted indoor assignments on plantations. Some traveled with the slave master, and because of their close association with the slave owner and his family, many learned how to read and write. But hard-working field slaves, not benefiting from the master's favors, regarded light-skinned blacks and house servants suspiciously. If covert meetings were disclosed, if obstinate slaves were punished, derision, which is division, was aimed at the suspected snitching treasonous house slave. Thus was the beginning of the skin color game that outlasted slavery. There's another quote by Bell Hooks here saying, long after slavery ended, a more privileged class of Black folks who were fairer skinned participated in creating and sustaining hierarchical social arrangements where they lorded over their dark counterparts. Since they lacked concrete material privilege, skin color itself became a mark of status. And if you think about the quadroon and octoroon balls held in Louisiana, or if you think about the fact that light skinned people, even to this day, feel that they are better than dark skinned people, this still has vestiges of reality to this very day. A time of unity. After emancipation, former slaves scrimped, saved, and sacrificed to escape the cruelties of the Deep South and start anew in the North. The fact that they were prohibited from living among whites or patronizing their businesses motivated many to create their own fortunes. A quote from a former slave named Jasper Battle after emancipation. Us got together and raised money to buy ground enough for a churchyard and a graveyard for the colored folks. That graveyard filled up so fast that they had to buy more land several times. Us helped them build the first church, the first colored church in Hancock County. In an interview for this book, Stephen Pitts, PhD, labor policy specialist at the UC Berkeley Center for Labor Research and Education, explained how white society before the 1960s forced blacks into states of unity. Disunity is part and parcel of this victory over legal segregation, which loosened social constraints, Pitts explained. For instance, there was a cohesion of Black consumer spending during the Jim Crow era. What made it so cohesive was the lack of options. We had to buy Black. Blacks who migrated to Oklahoma exploited new visas and developed one of the most affluent districts in the country. By 1920, Greenwood Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, boasted a number of thriving Black owned grocery stores, barbershops, clothing stores, funeral parlors, medical and dental services, and an eclectic mix of professionals. Behind the success of Tulsa's Black Wall Street, its bus line, newspapers, theaters, drugstores, hotels, the hospital, public library, and more than a dozen churches was a commitment of professional, blue collar and low income blacks to recycle their wealth. So in this segregated world, we had the opportunity to amass wealth because we had no choice but to spend our money with each other. Tulsa's Black Wall Street was dealt a crushing blow when whites dynamited the district into oblivion during the 1921 Tulsa race riot. The Tulsa incident was not the only example in which whites purposely burned or destroyed Black neighborhoods and businesses, stole their farmland, or initiated bloody riots when Black laborers threatened their livelihoods. Following that riot, city officials passed strict, unaffordable ordinances that forced many black Greenwood residents to relocate. Through violence, intimidation, and race based legal restrictions, blacks soon came to realize that the safety, stability, and prosperity that usually accompanies innovation, hard work, and determination was, for them, just another dream deferred. I'll add here that they did rebuild Black Wall Street, and many of those stores came back, but with integration came the integration of those black dollars that used to circulate in the black community into the white community. And with integration, that money began to divert itself into the white community. But white people never really in mass patronized black businesses. Divided and Conquered starts with a quote from Bell Hooks. Isolation is a favored weapon of psychological terrorists. What's missing from the Black History Month sound bites and inspiring reflections are the stories of division that existed between the groups fighting for social change. Public feuds over class and ideological differences all helped to undermine and cripple many progressive movements. These include the incidents of crabbing and backstabbing along the lines of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and Carter G. Woodson and Thurgood Marshall, and Roy Wilkins' problem with Martin Luther King Jr. What could have been a respectful, multifaceted approach to Black progress became grounds for exploitation by vengeful government officials, particularly the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover. Aside from organic and predictable ideological splits among Black leaders, Hoover let loose no less than 15,000 agents to disrupt unity efforts between Black folk, said Dr. William E. Cross, author of The Negro to Black Conversion Experience, written in 1971, and Shades of Black Diversity in African American Identity, written in 1991, in an interview for this book. External forces, Cross argues, spent millions of dollars, devoted untold manpower and resources to keep whatever unity potential Blacks had under wraps. Free at last. The most powerful social experience for Blacks since Reconstruction exploded in the 1960s. The civil rights movement gave hope while it began the upending of the officially racist American social order. It was a moment, only a moment, of unapologetic, authentic ethnicity and self definition. The Black Power movement represented an effort to reclaim our African history, images, dignity, self respect, and communities. And yes, sympathetic whites were welcome and active in the cause, but it was unmistakably ours. Blacks were the movement leaders, its inspiration, and its foot soldiers. Expanding on the teachings of Du Bois, Garvey, Woodson, and other pre Vietnam War era thinkers, a culturally inspired generation set out to revolutionize the meaning of economic and social cooperation. Representatives of the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam, Huey Newton and Malcolm X, encouraged Blacks to establish their own schools, businesses, and social programs. such as the Panthers' free breakfast program that fed thousands of inner city children. While Dr. King and other civil rights leaders peacefully worked to tear down legal barriers and push for integration, other, more militant groups demanded the right to defend themselves as they addressed economic and class issues. Instead of strategizing, playing with their diverse strengths, perhaps assuming a good guy, bad guy role to share in a mutual prize, civil rights and black power leaders launched verbal attacks at each other, each jockeying to be the ultimate organization with the ultimate plan for black people. Each organization was so intent on being the one, they often underestimated the skill of the opposition. The public bickering amounts to a slow pitch softball lobbed at a grand slam hitter. With the use of the negative propaganda bat, the seasoned black inferiority team, as usual, won game after game. Masses media. As the feuds festered, the mainstream media sensationalized black divisions. Not only did this stoke the flames of discontent, but it solidified popular perception that blacks were only capable of disorganized, chaotic, and dangerous leadership. In September of 1961, more than 30 religious leaders endorsed a letter sent to Reverend J. H. Jackson, the head of the National Baptist Convention. The letter beseeched Jackson to retract the public accusations claiming that Dr. King was responsible for the death of one of his supporters, saying, "Whatever may be our differences within the denomination, this uncalled for and unprovoked attack credited to you upon one of the greatest men of our time will only serve the purposes of the segregationist forces in America who are determined to suppress the Negro community all over this nation." Tensions between King and Jackson had escalated since 1956 when some religious leaders urged King to challenge Jackson for the presidency of the National Baptist Convention, or the NBC. The men disagreed on civil rights tactics. Jackson advocated redress through the court system in opposition to King's in-your-face method of nonviolent social confrontation. Pandemonium erupted during the 1961 National Baptist Convention in Kansas City, Missouri, when Jackson and the Reverend Gardner Taylor, whom King supported, both claimed they had won the presidency. Among the onstage chaos, one of Jackson's supporters, the Reverend Arthur G. Wright, toppled off the dais, struck his head, and subsequently died from his injuries. Jackson's allegation that King and his supporters' involvement resulted in an election campaign so vicious it produced violence was ripe fruit for the September 10th, 1961 Chicago Tribune headline, which said, "Calls Dr. King mastermind of the fatal riot." The media did an excellent job of portraying not only King, but all Black groups at one time or another as conservative or revolutionary, out of touch or philosophically divided, under communist influence or controlled by militant revolutionaries. As in the days of slavery, the media serves as the propaganda tool to keep blacks wary of potential troublemakers. A brief shining moment stolen starts with a quote from a neurosurgeon named Spencer, who says, I remember this one time. There was an internist who happened to be Caucasian. Anyway, he was treating a black patient who needed to see a neurologist. So the internist referred him to me. The moment this man walked into my office and saw me, he became so angry. Like, why did you send me to this black doctor? Is it because I'm black? He was actually offended that I was black and assumed that I was subpar because of it. He stormed off in a huff and only came back because the white internist assured him that I was the best in the field. During the 1967 Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, convention in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sang the praises of a relatively new SCLC initiative destined to create hundreds of jobs, earn the respect of Black consumers, and pump millions into urban areas. Indeed, Operation Breadbasket had such potential. The program, influenced by selective buying campaign of the Reverend Leon Sullivan of Philadelphia, became an economic arm of the SCLC headed by Jesse Jackson. Yes, that Jesse Jackson. Operation Breadbasket's threats of boycotts convinced major Chicago food chains to carry products produced by blacks, such as Joe Louis milk, Mumbo barbecue sauce, and Diamond Sparkle wax. Under Jackson's leadership, the program, within 3 years, generated more than 3,000 jobs and pumped 22 million into the South Side Chicago area. The Black Power movement that birthed initiatives like Operation Breadbasket was indeed a brief, shining moment. But we mustn't over romanticize the era. While we experienced its potential, the Black Inferiority Complex campaign worked its voodoo, reminding Blacks that the new movement was still an inferior competitor to all of its superior brands. At an Operation Breadbasket meeting I attended in the 60s, the Reverend Willie T. Barrow, later chair of the board emeritus of the Rainbow Push Coalition, related that some black folks had remarked that Joe Louis milk, a black owned brand, tasted chalky compared to white brands like Dean and Hawthorne Melody. This taste perception existed, she noted, despite the fact that Joe Louis milk came from the exact same processing plant as the other two. After landmark civil rights laws were passed in the mid 1960s, great sources of potential and wealth and stability were discarded by legions of brainwashed blacks. They abandoned their communities and businesses to chase the dream of a newly integrated society, patronizing and working for popular and prominent white businesses instead of creating, growing, and supporting their own became the symbol of progress. Nevertheless, the integration fantasy turned out to be another spiritually uplifting but failed experiment, mostly because we were missing an essential element that makes prosperity possible in the land of opportunity: the Great Culture Robbery. Why is it that other ethnic groups, some who have native lands, can come to this country, work together in unison, and outperform Blacks who've been here for centuries? The answer to that question is also connected to our initial sojourn to America. Had Africans come to this nation voluntarily, with their cultural heritage and languages intact, we could have, like all other ethnic groups, adapted those anchors for use in this new land. Koreans, for example, have transplanted cooperative methods from their native culture to America. The Korean word ki refers to an agreement or bond, a social organization based upon the principle of mutual cooperation and aid with a specific objective. Although there are many different types of keys, all collect dues and manage funds. Korean Americans use keys as a sort of private banking system within their community. Business owners contribute money to the key and make loans to potential Korean entrepreneurs without application or promissory note. Vietnamese have and use a similar system called a RASCA, Rotating Credit and Savings Association. Vietnamese RASCA groups utilize the Huey system. The groups meet regularly with each member bringing a fixed sum of cash to help start or support a Vietnamese business. Instead of complaining about banks not lending to us, why haven't African Americans been able to create or maintain independent lending systems that sustain community business? Perhaps it's because the critical elements of the key and the Huey are trust and cultural unity, elements severed from the Black experience. All peoples have divisions and interscene battles. However, few other minority groups in America have been conditioned from infancy to view each other through the jaundiced eyes of those who dehumanize them. The myth of individualism starts with a quote from Bob Johnson, the founder and former CEO of BET, who says, "The saddest thing is that in the 35 years of the BE 100, there has been no date that I can think of a significant merger of any kind brought two and two together to make five. I've attempted a couple of them, and I've been unsuccessful." Slavery, subjugation, dehumanization, and institutionalized oppression are not the stuff of which strong communal foundations are built. Unlike other ethnic groups, we can only draw on what our American past has taught us. In the Buy Now, Pay Later chapter, we discussed how many Blacks define their self worth through material possessions. The conditioning that feeds that impulse also affects business relationships. Many of us take pride in having our own thing, doing it our way, no matter how we struggle. It offsets societal forces that remind us of our powerlessness. The media constantly preaches the sermon of rugged individualism, while whites and every other race acquire, form, merge organizations, affiliations, and cabals to control the economic systems that benefit them the most. I will add here, rugged individualism is a myth. Everybody does it with somebody. The only people on the planet that could make rugged individualism real are Black people. And when we made it real, we began to believe the lie ourselves. Stop believing rugged individualism is the way to go. Rugged individualism is killing us, literally. Continuing. 50 years ago, owners of Black owned advertising agencies came together to form an association. Like white firms, that would make us stronger and more competitive. Yet, even though all of our futures were in peril, we were never able to establish a strong association. We are challenged to find any major mergers or acquisitions in the Black business arena. There have been successful Black companies that have been sold or brought out by white companies, but rarely do you see Black businesses from the corporate to the mom and pop store levels combine talents and share resources with the intent of dominating an industry or a neighborhood. When discussing this topic, Derek Dingle, executive director of Black Enterprise Magazine, identified the reason why Black entrepreneurs are hesitant to partner or merge, saying, "For the most part, our businesses have been companies that you've had a singular vision. You're an individual who has done all the spade work, the hard work. Therefore, you think, why should I give up a piece of my enterprise after I put in all the sweat equity?" That model may have worked for us in the past, but the business world is changing. With our present situation going into the future, especially in terms of accessing the same size and scale of contracts out of necessity, we have to form partnerships, Dingle added. As an example, he mentioned the recent merger between two African American firms, RS Information Systems and One Source Consulting LLC. The partnership enabled the two Black owned firms to become a $1 billion contractor to the federal government. Getting to that next level will be a challenge. While other ethnicities operate on the innate principle of cultural collectivism, we must maneuver in the ego swelling arena of individualism, which is just often a euphemism for isolation. Because of our disunity, we have disdain for cooperation and coalescence among ourselves. Consequently, we isolate ourselves from the possible benefits of collective development and business sustainability. Connecting the dots of disunity. Contemporary manifestation of crabbing. Complaining about Blacks who have moved ahead and trying to pull them back into the barrel of inferiority. The desire to keep ambitious or visionary Blacks in their proper place. The historical roots of crabbing. A basic tenet of American chattel slavery was the pitting of Blacks against each other. Individuality was discouraged so that racial dominance could be maintained. Backstabbing, active jealousy, envy, or hateful behavior toward other Blacks, a willingness to sabotage another Black person's possible success. Historical roots. Slave masters shrewdly rewarded Blacks for backstabbing, betrayals, and snitching. Blacks' sense of self was perversely enhanced by being a party to this betrayal because being closer to whites made them feel less inferior. There are groups that go through that to this very day, that they think that their proximity to whiteness is going to wash away their blackness and somehow make them better. Lack of coalescence, contemporary manifestations. Refusal to unite to create strong collective. Fear that another Black person at your level will threaten your job or upward mobility. Operates independently at a substandard level and never gains traction from collective effort. The historical roots of this: slave masters aggressively discouraged coalescence among slaves. We were brainwashed to distrust and disrespect other Blacks and to diminish Black efforts. Since opportunities for Blacks and white institutions have always been limited, we viewed another Black's success as our personal loss. Lack of support and or mistrust of other Black goods and services. The contemporary manifestation. The white man's ice is colder. The belief that goods or services created and or distributed by Blacks are inherently inferior, therefore refusing to support them. The historical roots of this: the Black inferiority complex taught that anything we did, said, or produced was inferior. Throughout history, our mistakes, missteps, and failures have been blown out of proportion, fueling the widespread belief that we are inherently flawed. And finally, exceptionalism, the contemporary manifestation of that. The exception to the rule theory, feeling special being the only Black in all white circles, feeling extremely gratified when whites compliment you for being different from other Blacks. We have a Supreme Court justice who's going through that. His name is Clarence Thomas. He feels that he is the special Negro in the room, and he now wants to shut the door and lock all the rest of us out of that opportunity. The historical roots: when given an opportunity to interact with quote unquote superior people, we feel and felt superior. Modern institutions keep Blacks separated by exaggerating and exploiting their differences. We wanted to be the only one because it gave us status over the lowly rest. Building a bridge to unity. Hundreds of years of schooling in the Black inferiority complex have left us with no affirming, solid cultural ground beneath our feet. We view one another with the same contempt and suspicion with which the majority views us. We laugh at Chris Rock's Blacks versus Niggas routine. It gives those labeled as inferior the luxury to separate themselves from those people. I suppose there's some benefit to that release, but like everything else, there's a price to pay. The short term benefits of these attributes versus the long term benefits and costs of these attributes. Crabbing. Black folk make me crazy. If I don't complain, I'll explode. It's a great release. The long term cost: complaining about another Black person's achievement is really a self indictment. The possibility that another Black person may move ahead solicits that If she made it, what's my excuse feeling? Crabbing about blacks reinforces negative perceptions and validates the stereotype of your inferior status. Backstabbing, sabotaging another black man or person makes it possible for me to move ahead. After all, there are only so many opportunities available for black folk. Dog eat dog, right? Hatred, the long term costs. Hatred, envy, and sabotage stunt opportunities for other blacks and provide opportunities for other races. Stopping one black person has a domino effect, guaranteeing others won't benefit from the high ranking black person's success. Lack of coalescence, short term benefits. Why bother? Blacks can never do anything right. Why set myself up for the obvious failure? It's best to go it alone or team up with white people with the power, resources, and connections. Besides, if I help elevate another black person, he may become a threat to my upward mobility. The long term costs. Disunity makes the collective even more vulnerable. Just as a robust economy is good for the nation, a higher ratio of successful blacks increases opportunities for black communities, schools, and businesses. Blacks will forever remain on a substandard level if we refuse to coalesce, plan, work together, and most importantly, share the wealth. The wealth doesn't have to be money. The wealth is also your knowledge base and the information that you have in your head. Lack of support and mistrust of Black goods and services. Short term benefit. I go out of my way to avoid supporting Blacks because they will let me down. Let's be real. Whites do everything better. I give my why give my hard earned money to a Black person when I know the job will not be done correctly? The long term cost. The white man's ice is not colder. There are subpar white businesses, services, and products as well as Black. Going out of their way to not patronize Black businesses helps other races exploit the wealth and resources of Black communities while enriching the families and strengthening the neighborhoods of other races. Some people say that the Black dollar stays within that community for less than 8 seconds. I don't know if that's true. I know that it doesn't circulate for months like some dollars do. And that's because we don't own the grocery stores. We don't own the property, the house that we live in. We don't own the finance company for the car that we drive. We don't own the grocery store that we eat at. We don't own any of the primary businesses that are life sustaining. We may own a clothing store, but you have a lot of clothing choice. You have home choice and housing choice as well. You do get to choose what car you drive, but there are some things that you need to survive, food and shelter being the main two. And because we don't own our food supplier and we don't own the land that we live on, then we wind up spending a disproportionate amount of our income on sustenance living, on the bills we need to sustain life every day. We don't own a utility company. We don't own the land that we live on, and we don't own the auto finance company. And those are the three things that we need. And we don't own a lot of grocery stores. So at the point that we are looking at how Black dollars are circulated and spent within the community, we don't own any of the businesses that support life. And lastly, exceptionalism, the short term benefits. In a sea of failure, it's quite nice to be considered the exception to the norm. I like having my achievements noticed. When I walk into the boardroom or the social club, I get the white folks' instant respect. Obviously, I'm special, or else I wouldn't be here. The long term costs of that type of ideology. Everyone has the ability to be special. Human beings are not trinkets or display models. Feeling unique in the boardroom or social club is a selfish, counterproductive indulgence. While languishing in your one and only status, those around you are doing business and making valuable connections with folks who look and think like them. Just as there is no unity meter to empirically gauge our cohesion, no magic formula exists that will bring us together. Every society and group has its fissures. We have ours. However, it is our duty to ensure that these fissures are not someone else's making. Because we have internalized negative propaganda about who we are more likely to treat those who look like us poorly. This is the real source of disunity in the Black community. Disunity cues. Brotherhood is not for some otherhood. We should not be sitting idly by, watching as other groups progress through unity and move up and ahead of us. We did it before, we can do it again. The you and I of unity. I make it my personal responsibility to be a force for coalescence. A fist is stronger than five open fingers. Be a yaysayer. See your glass as half full by learning to value your own abilities and those of other African Americans. We need to envision the unity we seek and be proactively positive. Let's transform our attitude about what is positive. Don't hate, elevate. Seize the opportunity to encourage the accomplishments of others. As Alex Haley said, find the good and praise it. Collaborative relationships. It's hard to imagine where I'd be today if not for the National Black McDonald's Operators Association, which is now one of the largest and most influential Black organizations in the nation. In 1968, with race riots blazing across the country after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, it dawned on McDonald's Corporation executives that having all white owner operators and managers at its high volume restaurants in Black neighborhoods might be a dangerous proposition. Enter Roland Jones, at the time a McDonald's restaurant manager in Washington, D.C. Eager to create Black franchises and managers, Jones was promoted to the position of regional consultant in Chicago. In his book, Standing Up and Standing Out, Jones writes that he was the first Black man to set foot on the McDonald's corporate ladder in Chicago. Jones could have been content in his role as the only Black on the corporate level at McDonald's. He could have been he could have been that richly rewarded, smiling Black face in the company who's made no waves and opened no doors for other Black folk. But that's not the Roland Jones I met in the early 1970s. Working closely with Herman Petty, who in 1968 became the first Black McDonald's owner operator in Chicago, Jones had officially formed the National Black McDonald's Operators Association, or the NBMOA. The new organization, originally consisting of 5 Black owners and operators, was dedicated to providing employment for Black youth and helping the McDonald's Corporation cultivate partnerships with African American organizations, vendors, and suppliers. In 1972, Roland arranged for me to make a presentation on behalf of Burrell Advertising, at which time was then NBMOA's second Mideastern Midwestern convention in Chicago. In his book, Roland writes about the event that helped put Burrell Advertising on the map, saying, what really got everyone fired up in 1973 was a discussion I led and presentation by Tom Burrell. Most of the convention attendees knew little about Tom before that meeting, but he was about to change the way Black people perceived McDonald's and the way McDonald's marketed itself to the significant portion of its customers who were not white. The collaborative relationship between Tom and the National Black McDonald's Operators Organization Association and McDonald's provided to be one of the most mutually beneficial that I never ever had the experience of in business. The operative words in Roland's statement are collaborative relationships. I share this story not to boast about my former clients, but to speak of our success and the power of unity. We united in the past and we can do it again. This time we are stronger. We have more information, greater resources, and a firm intention to build a sustainable future. Don't hate, elevate. Today, the NBMOA has 33 chapters in 32 states with approximately 375 members. The handful of original members were truly the exception to the rule because they understood that every link in the chain needed to be reinforced. They set up an organization where new Black owner operators could learn from their mistakes, marshal resources, and become a strong collective. They committed to a long term strategy to foster solid partnerships with Black businesses that would help stabilize the communities in which they operated. In my career, I have been blessed to interact with many individuals like Roland and the men and women of the NBMOA. There were others, like former NAACP President Bruce Gordon, who personified the meaning of purposeful unity. Gordon, who also sits on several major corporate boards, has never been timid about standing up for Black inclusion. It was Gordon, as president of the Retail Markets Division of Verizon, who made it clear that Verizon should do business with minority firms. We need to let our united good works speak for us. The best revenge for white injustice is Black success. Products and services that earn a profit. We need collaboration and cooperation inspired by the quiet mantra of each one reach and teach one. With unity, all things are possible. There is no better time than now to heal our divisions. No better time to shift our minds. No better time to pool our resources and talents and soar. Instead of crabbing and backstabbing, this generation can be the pioneers who pool their resources and talent. This can be the generation that says, enough. The puppet master will no longer pull any of our strings. And that is the end of chapter 10, Disunity. What did you guys think about that? I think that we do have some problems, but I think that our biggest problem is that we are resource poor. We do not do what other cultures do, because one of a toxic trait that we have in our community is we put our kids out when they're 18. Sometimes we put them out when they're 15, 16, 14. We don't see the benefit of having a family house that everybody lives in, that everybody gets the benefit of us having that particular asset. We don't have unity within our family dynamics, let alone on a community or level. So let's get some unity in our family dynamics first. I don't know if anyone wanted to come up and add anything to the conversation, but I'm going to put the link in the chat while I finish my rant. The reality is that we don't have unity in our families. So let's get some unity in our families first. Let's put aside our petty differences and say, listen, we need to make sure we have life insurance policies on every family member over the age of 60, and that those life insurance policies are payable to a trust, and the members or beneficiaries of the trust is the generation that's paying for it and their children. So how about we do that? How about we decide that if we have a house in the family that can accommodate 2 to 6 to 8 people, we let those 2 to 6 to 8 people all put their money up and invest in that house being paid off, so that it is now an asset that can be used to open a business with a HELOC, or can be used to pay for college tuition, or can be used as an asset that can be leveraged to make wealth for the family. These are the types of things that we're not thinking about. So let's get some unity in our families first before we go on this tangent of trying to get unity with the whole community. Because we're not going to have unity with the whole community if we can't get along with the people that we're related to by blood. All right. That's all I have to say. I want to thank Real Black Gentlemen for being here, Sister Ron, the elders for being here, and anyone else that is in the chat. I know that Forecast is listening from Forecast Radio, who broadcasts on Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. I know that Brother Bakari is listening, who broadcasts periodically on the Black Business Network. I know that Koku is listening from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, Shoot the Breeze show that airs on Saturdays at 8 p.m. I know that Oni Tase is listening from the Pro Black Perspective. I know that KW Don 7 is listening. Bawana Haguziki is listening. Dorico Cooper is listening. Manning for Mayor is listening. Mike Cool is listening. Justin Liebert is listening. And so many others. And you. Yes, you, dear listener. I thank each and every one of you for being here. I appreciate your gifts and support. It helps me to buy books, and we have a lot of books to get through, and it helps keep this particular program going. I value each and every one of you for being here, and I will see you again on Tuesday, where we'll be reading The American Slave Coast. We're going to continue in that book. All right. Peace, guys.